He said, "You'll regret losing me." 2 weeks later, his face was on every news channel. Margaret Sullivan had been married to tech mogul David Sullivan for 15 years when she discovered the affairs, the hidden accounts, and the systematic way he'd been undermining her career while building his empire. David was the kind of man who believed his success made him untouchable, that his wealth could buy silence and his charm could smooth over any betrayal. He was wrong. The first affair Margaret discovered was with his secretary, a cliché so obvious it almost insulted her intelligence. But as she dug deeper, hiring a private investigator with money from her own secret account, she realized David's infidelities weren't random lapses in judgment. They were calculated moves in a larger game of power and control. Each woman he pursued had something he wanted: inside information from competing companies, social connections that could advance his business interests, or simply the thrill of conquest that fed his narcissistic appetite. When Margaret confronted him that October evening in their Malibu mansion, David didn't deny anything. Instead, he laughed. He actually laughed, swirling the whiskey in his crystal tumbler as if her pain was merely entertainment. "You think you can leave me?" he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You have no idea how this works, Maggie. I own this town. I own the judges, the lawyers, the media contacts. You'll walk away with nothing, and everyone will know you as the bitter ex-wife who couldn't keep her husband satisfied." Margaret stood there in her designer dress, a dress David had bought her for a charity gala where he'd publicly humiliated her by flirting with the event coordinator all evening, and felt something crystallize inside her chest. It wasn't anger. Anger was too small for what she felt. It was clarity, cold and sharp as winter air. David mistook her silence for defeat and continued his monologue, detailing exactly how he would destroy her reputation, her friendships, her standing in their social circle. "You'll regret losing me," he said finally, taking another sip of his whiskey. "No one will want damaged goods." Margaret nodded slowly, as if accepting her fate. "You're probably right," she said quietly. "I should be more grateful." David smiled, thinking he'd won. He had no idea that Margaret had been recording every word on the pen camera her investigator had given her, or that she'd been documenting his crimes for months. 2 weeks later, his face was on every news channel, but not for the reasons he'd ever imagined. Margaret had discovered that David's business empire was built on more than just betrayal and manipulation. It was built on fraud, money laundering, and connections to criminal organizations that made his personal indiscretions look like parking tickets. The first bombshell dropped on a Tuesday morning when the FBI raided Sullivan Tech's headquarters. Margaret watched from her new apartment, a modest place she'd rented under her maiden name, as news helicopters circled the building where she'd once attended company parties, smiling and playing the perfect corporate wife while David schmoozed clients and competitors alike. But the federal investigation was only the beginning. Margaret had spent months building relationships with investigative journalists, feeding them information about David's business practices in small, untraceable doses. She'd connected with other women David had manipulated, not just romantically, but professionally, creating a network of witnesses who could corroborate patterns of behavior that painted a picture of systematic abuse of power. The second twist came when David's business partner, Marcus Chen, appeared on national television claiming he'd been secretly cooperating with federal investigators for over a year. Marcus revealed that David had been using their company to launder money for an international cryptocurrency scheme, something Margaret had suspected but couldn't prove until she gained access to David's private communications through the very security system he'd installed to spy on her. David's arrogance had been his downfall in ways he never anticipated. He'd used the same surveillance technology he'd employed to monitor Margaret's activities to conduct his illegal business, never imagining she would turn his own weapons against him. The smart home system that tracked her every movement had also recorded his every incriminating phone call, every secret meeting, every illegal transaction. As the news coverage intensified, more victims began coming forward. Women from David's past, business associates he'd defrauded, employees he'd sexually harassed. All of them finding courage in numbers and in the meticulous documentation Margaret had helped coordinate. She'd become a clearinghouse for information, a safe harbor for people who'd been afraid to speak out against someone with David's power and connections. The third major revelation came when federal prosecutors announced they were investigating David for human trafficking. This stunned even Margaret, who thought she knew the depths of her husband's depravity. The investigation revealed that David had been using his legitimate business operations as cover for moving victims across state lines, exploiting vulnerable women through a combination of false job promises and debt bondage. Margaret realized that some of the business trips David had taken over the years, trips she'd never questioned because she'd trusted him implicitly, had been connected to this horrific enterprise. The guilt hit her like physical pain. She could have stopped this sooner if she'd been more suspicious, more vigilant. But her therapist, Dr. Sarah Martinez, helped her understand that David's manipulation had been calculated to keep her isolated and dependent, unable to see the full picture of his crimes. The fourth twist came when David's own mother, Patricia Sullivan, contacted Margaret directly. Patricia had always been cold to Margaret during their marriage, clearly preferring her son's previous girlfriend, a woman from their social class who understood how these things worked. But Patricia's call changed everything Margaret thought she knew about the Sullivan family dynamics. "He's been stealing from me too," Patricia said during their secret meeting at a downtown coffee shop. "My trust fund, the foundation money, everything. I've been trying to figure out how to stop him without destroying the family name, but after seeing the news, I realize the family name isn't worth protecting anymore." Patricia revealed that David had been forging documents to access family money for years, using his mother's signature on legal papers that transferred millions from charitable foundations into his personal accounts. She'd been gathering evidence of her own, working with forensic accountants to trace the money trail, but had been afraid to act because David had threatened to have her declared mentally incompetent if she opposed him. The fifth revelation shook Margaret to her core. David had been planning to have her committed to a psychiatric facility. She discovered this when Patricia shared documents she'd found in David's safe, including consultations with unethical doctors who specialized in declaring inconvenient family members mentally unfit. The plan was to have Margaret institutionalized after a carefully orchestrated public breakdown, allowing David to control her assets and eliminate her as a witness to his crimes. Preserve the original language as she read the psychiatric evaluation that had been prepared without her knowledge, describing her as paranoid, delusional, and dangerous to herself and others. The doctor who'd written it had never even met her, but David had paid him handsomely to create a medical justification for locking her away. The evaluation was scheduled to be submitted to the court the week after their confrontation, meaning Margaret's escape had been a matter of days, maybe hours. The sixth twist came from an unexpected source, David's golf buddy and longtime friend, Judge Harrison Blackwood. Harrison appeared on Margaret's doorstep one evening, looking haggard and ashamed. He'd come to confess that David had been blackmailing him for years, using photographs of Harrison's own extramarital affairs to influence court decisions in David's favor. "I should have reported it years ago," Harrison said, slumping in Margaret's small kitchen chair. "But I was scared of losing everything, my career, my family, my reputation." David said he was just asking for small favors, nothing that would really hurt anyone. I told myself it wasn't that serious, but then I started seeing the pattern. Every time someone tried to sue him or investigate his business, their cases would get delayed or dismissed. I was enabling a criminal, and I was too much of a coward to stop it. Harrison's confession opened up another avenue of investigation, revealing a network of corruption that extended throughout the local legal system. David hadn't just been bribing officials, he'd been systematically compromising them through blackmail, creating a web of complicity that protected him from consequences while destroying anyone who opposed him. The seventh bombshell hit when Margaret discovered David had been slowly poisoning her. Dr. Maya Martinez had suggested Margaret get a comprehensive medical evaluation after she mentioned feeling constantly fatigued and mentally foggy during the last year of her marriage. The blood tests revealed traces of psychiatric medications that Margaret had never been prescribed, drugs that would have supported David's planned mental incompetency claim while genuinely affecting her cognitive function. "He was gaslighting me chemically," Margaret told her support group, a circle of women who met weekly to discuss their experiences with manipulative partners. "I thought I was losing my mind because I actually was. He was drugging me to make me doubt my own perceptions, to make his lies about my mental state seem credible." The medical evidence became crucial in the criminal case against David, proving premeditation and adding attempted murder charges to his growing list of crimes. Margaret's doctor testified that the dosages found in her system could have caused permanent brain damage or death if continued long-term, transforming what might have been viewed as psychological abuse into clear evidence of attempted homicide. The eighth revelation came from international law enforcement. Interpol contacted the FBI with evidence that David's criminal network extended beyond American borders, connecting him to human trafficking operations in Eastern Europe and money laundering schemes in the Caribbean. His legitimate business had provided perfect cover for moving money and people across international borders, with Margaret's unwitting presence at social events lending respectability to meetings with criminal associates. Margaret remembered cocktail parties where David had introduced her to men she'd found unsettling but couldn't quite identify why. Now she understood. Her instincts had been correct, but David's manipulation had taught her to doubt her own judgment. These men had been criminals, and her presence had been part of their laundering operation, giving their gatherings the appearance of innocent social networking. The ninth twist involved David's brother, Michael Sullivan, who had always seemed like the family's black sheep compared to David's apparent success. Michael contacted Margaret through her lawyer, revealing that he'd been secretly documenting David's crimes for the FBI for over 3 years. He'd been playing the role of the disappointing younger brother while actually serving as an undercover informant, gathering evidence that would later become crucial in the federal prosecution. David always thought he was smarter than everyone else, Michael told Margaret during their covert meeting. He never suspected that his screw-up brother might be working against him. "I've been wearing a wire to family dinners for years, recording his confessions, his plans, his casual admissions of guilt. He trusted me because he thought I was too stupid and too much of a failure to be a threat." Michael's recordings captured David discussing Margaret's planned institutionalization, his methods for controlling judges and politicians, and his expansion plans for his criminal enterprises. The audio evidence was devastating, showing a man who viewed other people as disposable resources to be exploited for his personal gain. The 10th major revelation came when investigators discovered David had been planning Margaret's murder. The evidence emerged from his encrypted communications with a contact in organized crime, messages that detailed a plan to stage Margaret's death as a suicide after her mental breakdown became public. The timeline showed that if Margaret hadn't discovered his affairs and escaped when she did, she would have been dead within weeks. The murder plot was elaborate and chilling in its calculation. David had planned to increase Margaret's medication to lethal levels while simultaneously launching a public campaign about his concern for her mental health. He would play the grieving widower who'd tried desperately to save his troubled wife, gaining sympathy while inheriting her substantial trust fund and eliminating the primary witness to his crimes. Margaret's escape had disrupted this timeline, but David hadn't abandoned his plans. He'd simply modified them. Police found evidence that he'd hired professionals to make Margaret's death look like an accident or random crime, anything that wouldn't point back to him. Her decision to move apartments frequently and vary her routines had likely saved her life multiple times without her even knowing it. The 11th twist came from the most unexpected source, David himself. Facing overwhelming evidence and the prospect of life in prison, he agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for a plea deal. His confession revealed crimes that even Margaret's extensive investigation hadn't uncovered, including murders of business associates who had threatened to expose him and the systematic trafficking of dozens of women over nearly a decade. David's cooperation wasn't motivated by remorse. It was a calculated decision to minimize his own punishment while destroying his criminal associates before they could testify against him. Even facing justice, he remained the manipulative narcissist Margaret had lived with for 15 years, viewing his confession as just another business transaction to be optimized for personal benefit. The 12th revelation involved Margaret's own family. Her sister Jennifer, who had always seemed supportive during Margaret's marriage troubles, was revealed to have been feeding information to David about Margaret's activities and emotional state. Jennifer had been secretly working with David for years, helping him monitor and manipulate Margaret while pretending to offer sisterly support. "He paid me," Jennifer admitted when confronted with phone records and financial transactions. "But it wasn't just about the money. He convinced me that you were really having a breakdown, that he was trying to help you by keeping track of your behavior. I thought I was protecting you by reporting back to him about your mental state and daily activities." Jennifer's betrayal cut deeper than David's crimes because it revealed how thoroughly he'd corrupted everyone in Margaret's life. There had been no safe space, no relationship he hadn't infiltrated and poisoned with his manipulation. Margaret realized she'd been living in a carefully constructed prison where even her closest family members had been turned into unwitting guards. The 13th twist came when Margaret discovered she wasn't David's first wife, she was his third. The previous two women had both died under suspicious circumstances, deaths that had been ruled accidental at the time but were now being reinvestigated in light of new evidence about David's methods and motives. Sarah Kingston, David's first wife, had supposedly died in a hiking accident in 2003. She'd fallen from a cliff while the couple was on a romantic getaway, with David as the only witness to her slip. The insurance payout had provided the seed money for David's business empire, and Sarah's family had always suspected foul play but lacked evidence to challenge the official ruling. Lisa Chen, David's second wife and Marcus's sister, had died in a car accident in 2007. Her vehicle had crashed into a tree on a rural road, and while David hadn't been present, investigators now suspected he'd tampered with her car's braking system. Lisa had been threatening divorce and had hired a private investigator to look into David's business practices before her death. The pattern was clear and horrifying. David had been killing wives for money and freedom for over 2 decades, refining his methods with each murder. Margaret realized that her own survival wasn't due to luck or cleverness. It was because David had gotten overconfident and sloppy, believing his power made him untouchable. The 14th revelation involved Margaret's therapist, Dr. Martinez. During a routine session, Dr. Martinez confessed that David had initially paid her to treat Margaret, with instructions to document evidence of mental instability that could support his incompetency claims. However, Dr. Martinez had recognized the manipulation tactics and had instead been helping Margaret build psychological strength while secretly documenting evidence of David's abuse. "I've been working against him from the beginning," Dr. Martinez explained. "When he first contacted me, I could see what he was trying to do. Instead of helping him destroy you, I've been building a case file that documents the systematic psychological abuse you've endured. Every session we've had has been creating evidence that you're the victim, not the perpetrator." Dr. Martinez's files became crucial evidence in the prosecution's case, providing professional documentation of David's manipulation techniques and their psychological impact on Margaret. Her testimony helped establish the pattern of abuse that contextualized all of David's other crimes, showing how he used psychological warfare as a tool of control and domination. The 15th twist involved the discovery of David's biological father, a man named Vincent Torino, who was currently serving life in prison for multiple murders. David had hidden his true parentage, creating an elaborate false identity that painted him as the heir to a respectable business family rather than the son of a convicted killer. Vincent Torino had been a hitman for organized crime, and his methods bore striking similarities to David's own crimes. The genetic predisposition toward violence and manipulation had been inherited and refined, with David using his intelligence and social advantages to become a more sophisticated version of his criminal father. The revelation explained David's connections to organized crime and his comfort with violence as a business tool. He hadn't just stumbled into criminal behavior, he'd been raised in it, taught from childhood that other people existed to be exploited and eliminated when they became inconvenient. The 16th major development came when foreign governments began requesting David's extradition to face charges in their countries. The international scope of his crimes meant that even if he managed to negotiate a lighter sentence in the United States, he would face additional prosecutions in countries where the death penalty was still actively enforced for trafficking and murder. Margaret watched the news coverage of diplomatic negotiations over David's fate with a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. The man who had once threatened to destroy her life was now being fought over by multiple governments, each eager to prosecute him for crimes committed in their jurisdictions. His arrogance and sense of invincibility had crumbled into desperate attempts to avoid extradition to countries where life imprisonment would be a mercy. The 17th revelation came from Margaret's own investigation into her family's financial history. With David's manipulation no longer clouding her judgment, she discovered that her substantial inheritance, money David had been trying to steal through his planned murder, had actually been the target of his romantic pursuit from the very beginning. Margaret's grandmother had been a successful businesswoman who'd built a shipping empire in the 1960s, accumulating wealth that had been passed down through trusts and investments. David had researched her financial background before they'd ever met, targeting her specifically because of her inheritance potential rather than any genuine romantic interest. Their entire relationship had been a long-term con game, with David playing the role of the successful businessman to win her trust, while actually being a criminal who needed her money and social connections to legitimize his operations. Every anniversary, every gift, every moment of apparent intimacy had been calculated to maintain his access to her resources and social network. The 18th twist involved the revelation that Margaret's best friend, Catherine Walsh, had been having an affair with David for over 5 years. Catherine had been feeding David information about Margaret's emotional state, her suspicions about his behavior, and her plans to investigate his activities. Catherine's betrayal was particularly painful because she'd been the friend Margaret had confided in about her marriage troubles, seeking advice about David's increasingly controlling behavior. Catherine had encouraged Margaret to give David the benefit of the doubt, to trust him despite her instincts, all while secretly maintaining a sexual relationship with him and reporting Margaret's concerns back to him. "He told me you were paranoid and jealous," Catherine said during their confrontation. "He said he was trying to save your marriage by understanding what was making you so suspicious and angry. I thought I was helping both of you by keeping him informed about your emotional state and by encouraging you to trust him more." The 19th revelation came from investigators' discovery of David's extensive collection of surveillance recordings. He'd been secretly filming his sexual encounters with his various affairs, not for personal enjoyment, but as blackmail material to ensure their continued cooperation and silence. The recordings revealed a predator who viewed sex as another tool of manipulation and control. Among the recordings were videos of prominent community leaders, business executives, and even law enforcement officials, all of whom had been compromised through their involvement with David. He'd created an extensive network of blackmail victims who were forced to protect him and advance his interests or face public exposure and career destruction. The final and most shocking revelation came when investigators uncovered evidence that David had been planning to fake his own death and assume a new identity if his criminal empire ever came under investigation. He'd spent years building false identities, moving money to offshore accounts, and establishing safe houses in countries without extradition treaties. The escape plan was elaborate and well-funded, involving plastic surgery to alter his appearance, forged documents to establish his new identity, and a network of criminal associates who would help him disappear permanently. If Margaret hadn't acted when she did, David might have successfully vanished before law enforcement could build their case against him. Margaret realized that her decision to gather evidence and expose David hadn't just saved her own life. It had prevented him from escaping justice and continuing his crimes under a new identity. Her courage to act despite her fear had stopped a predator who might have spent decades destroying more lives before finally being caught. As Margaret watched David's final court appearance, where he was sentenced to multiple life terms without possibility of parole, she felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief that justice had been served, sadness for all the lives he'd destroyed, and pride in her own strength for surviving his manipulation and fighting back effectively. The man who had once told her she would regret losing him now faced the rest of his life in maximum security prison, his empire destroyed, his reputation ruined, and his victims finally free to rebuild their lives. Margaret had not only survived his attempt to destroy her, she had turned his own weapons against him and ensured that he could never hurt anyone else again. In the end, David Sullivan had been right about one thing: someone did regret losing him. But it wasn't Margaret who felt that regret. It was every criminal associate, corrupt official, and criminal organization who had depended on his protection and resources. They were the ones who truly mourned his downfall, while his victims celebrated their freedom and the justice that had finally been served. Margaret Sullivan, no longer hiding behind her married name, stood outside the courthouse that final day as a survivor, an advocate, and a reminder that even the most powerful predators can be brought down by the courage of those they try to destroy. She had proven that regret, like justice, doesn't always fall on the person who expects to feel it. The story seemed to have reached its conclusion with David Sullivan's conviction and sentencing, but Margaret's ordeal was far from over. 3 months after the trial, she received a call that would shatter her newfound sense of security and reveal that David's criminal network was more extensive and dangerous than anyone had imagined. The call came from Agent Sarah Chen, the FBI investigator who had led David's prosecution. "Margaret, we need to talk immediately," Agent Chen said, her voice tight with urgency. "There's been a development that changes everything we thought we knew about your husband's operations. Can you come to the federal building within the hour?" Margaret's blood ran cold. She'd been slowly rebuilding her life, working with a trauma therapist to process the psychological damage David had inflicted, and starting to believe that the nightmare was finally behind her. But Agent Chen's tone suggested that the nightmare was entering a new and potentially more dangerous phase. At the FBI field office, Margaret sat across from Agent Chen and a man she didn't recognize, tall, graying at the temples, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "This is Deputy Director Williams from our Counterterrorism Division," Agent Chen explained. "What we're about to tell you is classified at the highest levels, and your life may depend on how seriously you take our security recommendations." Deputy Director Williams leaned forward, his expression grave. "Mrs. Sullivan, your husband wasn't just running criminal enterprises for profit. He was operating as an asset for a foreign intelligence service, specifically Russian military intelligence. The human trafficking, money laundering, and corruption network he built wasn't just criminal. It was part of a larger operation designed to compromise American infrastructure and national security." The 21st revelation hit Margaret like a physical blow.
David hadn't just been a sociopathic criminal, he'd been a traitor, selling American secrets and using his criminal network to facilitate foreign espionage operations. The technology company that had made him wealthy was actually a front for stealing industrial secrets and passing them to hostile foreign governments. "We've been analyzing the intelligence David gathered through his various operations," Agent Chen continued. "The women he trafficked weren't chosen randomly. Many of them had access to sensitive information through their jobs at defense contractors, government agencies, and technology companies. He was using sexual exploitation as a method of intelligence gathering,
forcing victims to steal classified information or face exposure of their compromised situations." Margaret thought about all the charity events and social gatherings she'd attended with David, where he'd networked with prominent business and political leaders. She realized now that these weren't just opportunities for criminal recruitment. They were intelligence-gathering operations where David collected information about American defense capabilities, political strategies, and economic policies that could be valuable to foreign adversaries. The poisoning you experienced wasn't just about making you compliant for his domestic crimes, Deputy Director Williams explained. The drugs he was giving you included experimental compounds developed by Russian intelligence services, designed to make subjects more susceptible to suggestion and less capable of recognizing manipulation. You were essentially a test subject for chemical mind control techniques. Margaret's hands began to shake as she processed the full scope of what she'd unknowingly been part of. Her marriage hadn't just been a personal hell, it had been a national security disaster, with her as an unwitting participant in operations that had potentially damaged American interests and endangered countless lives. The 22nd twist came when Agent Chen revealed that Margaret herself had been under foreign intelligence surveillance for months, both during and after her marriage to David. Russian operatives had been monitoring her activities, trying to determine how much she knew about David's true allegiances and whether she posed a threat to their ongoing operations. "They've made several attempts to eliminate you," Deputy Director Williams said bluntly. "What you thought were random accidents and coincidences over the past year were actually assassination attempts. The car that ran a red light and nearly hit you last month, the gas leak in your apartment building, the food poisoning you experienced at that restaurant, none of those were accidents." Margaret felt the room spinning as she realized how close she'd come to death multiple times without even knowing it. The foreign operatives had been more subtle than David's planned murder attempts, using methods that would appear accidental and wouldn't draw investigation. Only the FBI's extensive surveillance of Russian intelligence activities had revealed the pattern of attempts on her life. "We believe they're planning a more direct approach now," Agent Chen continued. "Our intelligence suggests they've decided you know too much about David's operations to be allowed to live, regardless of whether you actually have access to classified information. They can't risk the possibility that you might remember something that could expose other assets in their network." The revelation that her life was still in danger from foreign intelligence services was almost too much for Margaret to process. She'd survived David's attempts to destroy her, only to discover that she was now the target of professional assassins working for a hostile foreign government. The scoop of the conspiracy she'd unknowingly been part of was staggering in its implications for national security. The 23rd revelation emerged when Deputy Director Williams explained that David's cooperation with federal prosecutors had been part of a larger intelligence operation. His confession hadn't been motivated by genuine remorse or even self-preservation. It had been a calculated move to protect other Russian assets by directing attention away from the espionage aspects of his crimes toward his more conventional criminal activities. "David never revealed the full extent of his intelligence activities," Williams said. "He gave us enough information about his criminal network to satisfy the prosecutors, but he carefully omitted anything that would expose other foreign operatives or compromise ongoing intelligence operations. Even facing life in prison, he was still protecting his handlers and the broader conspiracy." Margaret realized that David's apparent cooperation had been yet another manipulation designed to control the narrative around his crimes and minimize damage to the intelligence network he'd served. His confessions had focused on financial crimes and personal violence, while carefully avoiding any mention of the classified information he'd stolen or the foreign operatives he'd worked with. "We've been using his partial cooperation to identify other assets in the network," Agent Chen explained. "But the Russians have become aware that we're onto them, which is why they've escalated their efforts to eliminate potential witnesses. You're not just a threat because of what you might know about David. You're a threat because your survival proves that their operations can be exposed and their assets can be compromised." The 24th twist came when Williams revealed that Margaret's own family history had made her a target for foreign recruitment long before she'd ever met David. Her grandmother's shipping empire had been involved in military logistics during World War II and the Cold War, giving the family access to sensitive information about American naval operations and supply chains. "Your grandmother, Eleanor Patterson, was approached by Soviet intelligence services in the 1960s," Williams explained. "She refused their recruitment attempts and reported them to the FBI, but that made your family a subject of ongoing foreign intelligence interest. When David began his relationship with you, it wasn't just about your personal wealth. It was about gaining access to your family's historical connections to military logistics and shipping operations." Margaret learned that her family's business records, which she'd inherited along with the financial assets, contained information about American military supply chains that would be valuable to foreign intelligence services decades after the original operations had ended. David had been systematically photographing and copying these historical documents, passing information to his handlers that helped them understand American military logistics patterns that might still be relevant to current operations. "The Russians have been playing a very long game," Williams continued. "They've been tracking American military and industrial families for generations, looking for opportunities to exploit historical knowledge and family connections. Your marriage to David was part of a multi-generational intelligence operation targeting your family's legacy in military logistics. The revelation that her entire family line had been under foreign intelligence scrutiny for decades made Margaret feel as though her whole life had been built on lies and manipulation. Even her grandmother's legitimate business success had been tainted by its unwitting connection to national security issues that continued to reverberate through the generations. The 25th and final revelation was perhaps the most shocking of all. Agent Chen produced a thick file filled with photographs and documents that revealed Margaret's real father wasn't the man who had raised her. Her biological father was Viktor Petrov, a high-ranking Russian intelligence officer who had seduced her mother during a diplomatic mission in the 1970s as part of a long-term infiltration strategy. "Your mother never knew Viktor's true identity," Agent Chen explained gently. "She thought he was a cultural attaché who had fallen genuinely in love with her during his assignment in the United States. When she became pregnant, he disappeared, and she never heard from him again. She married the man you knew as your father and never told anyone about the affair that produced you." Margaret stared at the photographs of Viktor Petrov, seeing her own facial features reflected in the face of a foreign intelligence operative. Her entire sense of identity crumbled as she realized that her biological heritage connected her directly to the same intelligence service that David had been working for, making their relationship not a coincidence but a carefully orchestrated reunion. "We believe the Russians have always known about your parentage," Williams said. "David's recruitment and marriage to you wasn't just about accessing your grandmother's business legacy. It was about bringing you back into their sphere of influence through your biological father's bloodline. They saw you as a potential long-term asset who could be developed over decades." The implications were staggering. Margaret realized that her entire life had been shaped by intelligence operations she'd never known existed.
that her relationships and major life decisions had been influenced by foreign operatives working to advance their government's interests at the expense of her own country's security. Viktor Petrov is still alive and still active in Russian intelligence, Agent Chen continued. We have reason to believe he's been monitoring your life from a distance, waiting for the right opportunity to make contact and attempt to recruit you directly. David's arrest and conviction may have accelerated their timeline for approaching you. Margaret felt as though she was learning that everything she'd believed about herself and her family was a carefully constructed fiction designed to serve the interests of a foreign power. Her grandmother's business success, her mother's romantic history, her own marriage to David, all of it had been shaped by intelligence operations spanning multiple generations. The good news, Deputy Director Williams said, is that your actions in exposing David's crimes have actually helped us map a significant portion of the Russian intelligence network operating in the United States. Your courage in fighting back against David has made you an inadvertent hero in counterintelligence operations that will protect American national security for years to come. But the personal cost of that heroism was enormous. Margaret would need to live under federal protection for the foreseeable future, possibly requiring a new identity and relocation to a secure location where foreign operatives couldn't reach her. The life she'd been trying to rebuild after escaping David's control would need to be abandoned in favor of a witness protection program designed to keep her alive and prevent her from being used as leverage against American interests. As Margaret sat in the sterile conference room, surrounded by federal agents and classified documents that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy she'd been trapped in, she realized that her fight for freedom was far from over. David's conviction had been just the beginning of a larger battle against forces that operated on a global scale, with resources and patience that made his domestic criminal empire look like amateur hour. The man who had told her she would regret losing him had been more right than either of them had ever imagined, but not in the way he'd intended. Margaret would indeed live with the consequences of their relationship for the rest of her life. But those consequences would involve serving her country's security interests rather than being destroyed by his manipulation. She had survived a sociopathic criminal only to discover that she was the daughter of a foreign spy, the widow of a traitor, and the unwitting center of an intelligence operation that had been targeting her family for over 50 years. But she had also proven that even the most sophisticated conspiracy could be disrupted by one person's refusal to accept abuse and injustice. Margaret Sullivan, or whatever name she would carry in her new life under federal protection, had become something no one involved in the conspiracy had expected. A survivor who had turned the weapons of her enemies against them, exposing decades of foreign intelligence operations and protecting countless future victims from the network that had tried to destroy her. The woman who had once been told she was worthless and powerless had become one of the most valuable counterintelligence assets in the ongoing fight to protect American national security from foreign manipulation and control. Her personal tragedy had become a national security triumph, proving that sometimes the most effective way to fight sophisticated enemies is simply to refuse to surrender to their attempts at domination. Tentar novamente. The federal protection program that was supposed to keep Margaret safe became her next nightmare when she discovered that the safe house in rural Montana had been compromised before she even arrived. Agent Chen's urgent phone call came at 3 in the morning, jolting Margaret from the first peaceful sleep she'd had in months. "Get out now," Agent Chen's voice was sharp with panic. "Don't pack anything, don't turn on lights, just move to the emergency exit we discussed and wait for extraction. The location has been blown. And we have credible intelligence that a team is en route to your position." Margaret's hands shook as she pulled on clothes in the darkness, her mind racing through the security protocols she'd been trained on during her orientation to witness protection. The safe house had seemed so secure, buried in wilderness 40 miles from the nearest town, with electronic surveillance that should have detected any approaching threats hours in advance.
As she crept through the darkened house toward the concealed exit that led into the forest, Margaret heard the distant sound of vehicles approaching on the gravel road. The extraction team wasn't supposed to arrive for another 20 minutes, which meant the approaching vehicles belonged to people who wanted her dead. The 26th revelation came as Margaret huddled in the predetermined hiding spot deep in the Montana wilderness, waiting for her extraction team while listening to foreign-accented voices searching the safe house she'd just escaped. Through her encrypted communication device, Agent Chen explained that the security breach had come from within the FBI itself. "We have a mole in the counterintelligence division," Chen whispered, her voice barely audible over the static. "Someone with access to witness protection protocols has been feeding information to Russian intelligence for months, possibly years. Every safe house location, every security protocol, every extraction plan, they've had access to all of it." Margaret realized that her survival so far had been due to luck rather than the security measures that were supposed to protect her. The assassination attempts that had failed weren't because of superior FBI protection, but because the foreign operatives had been playing with her, using her as bait to flush out other American intelligence assets while planning her eventual elimination. "The mole has been identified," Chen continued, "but we can't move against him without exposing our investigation into the larger network. Deputy Director Williams has authorized a completely off-the-books operation to keep you safe while we work to neutralize the threat from within our own organization." The extraction that followed was unlike anything from Margaret's previous experience with federal protection. Instead of official FBI vehicles and uniformed agents, she was picked up by a man driving a battered pickup truck who identified himself only as Jake and spoke with a slight Southern accent that seemed authentic but somehow rehearsed. Jake drove through the night using back roads and logging trails that didn't appear on any official maps, explaining that they were operating outside normal federal protection protocols because those protocols had been compromised. "We're going completely dark," he said as they bounced along a rutted forest road. "No official safe houses, no government communication systems, no contact with anyone in the regular chain of command until we can sort out who's working for who." The 27th twist came when Jake revealed that he wasn't actually an FBI agent at all, but a former CIA operative who had been recruited by a secret counterintelligence unit that operated independently of official government agencies. The unit had been created specifically to handle cases where foreign intelligence services had penetrated regular law enforcement and intelligence organizations. "We've been tracking Russian infiltration of American intelligence services for over a decade," Jake explained as they stopped at an abandoned mining camp high in the Rocky Mountains. "Your case isn't unique. They've been systematically compromising federal agents and using American law enforcement resources to protect their own operations and eliminate threats to their networks." Margaret learned that her situation was part of a much larger crisis within American intelligence services, where foreign operatives had achieved such deep penetration that entire cases were being controlled by enemy agents posing as loyal Americans. The mole in the FBI who had been feeding information about her location was just one of dozens of compromised agents working throughout the government. "The official investigation into your husband's crimes was being monitored and controlled by Russian intelligence from the very beginning," Jake continued. "They allowed David to be convicted because his usefulness had ended, but they've been using the investigation to identify and compromise other American intelligence assets." The secret facility where Jake brought Margaret was hidden inside what appeared to be an abandoned copper mine, but had actually been converted into a sophisticated intelligence operations center staffed by former government agents who had been recruited to work outside official channels. The operation was funded through private sources and operated with complete independence from government oversight. Margaret met the facility's director, a woman who introduced herself only as Colonel Martinez, no relation to Margaret's former therapist, and who explained that Margaret's case had become a test case for combating foreign intelligence penetration of American institutions. "We're going to use you as bait," Colonel Martinez said bluntly. "But this time, you'll be protected by people who can't be compromised because we don't officially exist. We're going to let Russian intelligence think they've succeeded in eliminating you while actually using that success to map their entire American network." The 28th revelation came when Colonel Martinez revealed that Margaret's biological father,
Viktor Petrov, had been attempting to make contact with her through back channels, not to recruit her for Russian intelligence, but to warn her about a faction within Russian intelligence that wanted her dead regardless of her potential value as an asset. Viktor Petrov has been walking a tightrope for decades, Martinez explained. He's a Russian intelligence officer, but he's also a father who discovered he had a daughter living in America. When David Sullivan's activities began drawing attention to you, Viktor started trying to protect you without betraying his own country or compromising his position within Russian intelligence. Margaret learned that some of the assassination attempts against her had actually been prevented by Viktor's interference, not by FBI protection protocols. Her biological father had been working behind the scenes to delay or sabotage operations against her while maintaining his cover as a loyal Russian operative. "Viktor has been feeding us intelligence about Russian operations for the past 6 months," Martinez continued. "He's willing to defect and provide comprehensive information about Russian intelligence networks in exchange for protection for you and for his opportunity to establish a relationship with the daughter he never knew he had." The federal protection program that was supposed to keep Margaret safe became her next nightmare when she discovered that the safe house in rural Montana had been compromised before she even arrived. Agent Chen's urgent phone call came at 3 in the morning, jolting Margaret from the first peaceful sleep she'd had in months. "Get out now," Agent Chen's voice was sharp with panic. "Don't pack anything, don't turn on lights, just move to the emergency exit we discussed and wait for extraction. The location has been blown, and we have credible intelligence that a team is en route to your position." Margaret's hands shook as she pulled on clothes in the darkness, her mind racing through the security protocols she'd been trained on during her orientation to witness protection. The safe house had seemed so secure, buried in wilderness 40 miles from the nearest town, with electronic surveillance that should have detected any approaching threats hours in advance. As she crept through the darkened house toward the concealed exit that led into the forest, Margaret heard the distant sound of vehicles approaching on the gravel road. The extraction team wasn't supposed to arrive for another 20 minutes, which meant the approaching vehicles belonged to people who wanted her dead. The 26th revelation came as Margaret huddled in the predetermined hiding spot deep in the Montana wilderness, waiting for her extraction team while listening to foreign-accented voices searching the safe house she'd just escaped. Through her encrypted communication device, Agent Chen explained that the security breach had come from within the FBI itself. "We have a mole in the counterintelligence division," Chen whispered, her voice barely audible over the static. "Someone with access to witness protection protocols has been feeding information to Russian intelligence for months, possibly years. Every safe house location, every security protocol, every extraction plan, they've had access to all of it." Margaret realized that her survival so far had been due to luck rather than the security measures that were supposed to protect her. The assassination attempts that had failed weren't because of superior FBI protection, but because the foreign operatives had been playing with her, using her as bait to flush out other American intelligence assets while planning her eventual elimination. "The mole has been identified," Chen continued, "but we can't move against him without exposing our investigation into the larger network." Deputy Director Williams has authorized a completely off-the-books operation to keep you safe while we work to neutralize the threat from within our own organization. The extraction that followed was unlike anything from Margaret's previous experience with federal protection.
Instead of official FBI vehicles and uniformed agents, she was picked up by a man driving a battered pickup truck who identified himself only as Jake and spoke with a slight Southern accent that seemed authentic but somehow rehearsed. Jake drove through the night using back roads and logging trails that didn't appear on any official maps, explaining that they were operating outside normal federal protection protocols because those protocols had been compromised. "We're going completely dark," he said as they bounced along a rutted forest road. "No official safe houses, no government communication systems, no contact with anyone in the regular chain of command until we can sort out who's working for who." The 27th twist came when Jake revealed that he wasn't actually an FBI agent at all, but a former CIA operative who had been recruited by a secret counterintelligence unit that operated independently of official government agencies. The unit had been created specifically to handle cases where foreign intelligence services had penetrated regular law enforcement and intelligence organizations. "We've been tracking Russian infiltration of American intelligence services for over a decade," Jake explained as they stopped at an abandoned mining camp high in the Rocky Mountains. "Your case isn't unique. They've been systematically compromising federal agents and using American law enforcement resources to protect their own operations and eliminate threats to their networks." Margaret learned that her situation was part of a much larger crisis within American intelligence services, where foreign operatives had achieved such deep penetration that entire cases were being controlled by enemy agents posing as loyal Americans. The mole in the FBI, who had been feeding information about her location, was just one of dozens of compromised agents working throughout the government. "The official investigation into your husband's crimes was being monitored and controlled by Russian intelligence from the very beginning," Jake continued. "They allowed David to be convicted because his usefulness had ended, but they've been using the investigation to identify and compromise other American intelligence assets." The secret facility where Jake brought Margaret was hidden inside what appeared to be an abandoned copper mine, but had actually been converted into a sophisticated intelligence operations center staffed by former government agents who had been recruited to work outside official channels. The operation was funded through private sources and operated with complete independence from government oversight. Margaret met the facility's director, a woman who introduced herself only as Colonel Martinez, no relation to Margaret's former therapist, and who explained that Margaret's case had become a test case for combating foreign intelligence penetration of American institutions. "We're going to use you as bait," Colonel Martinez said bluntly, "but this time you'll be protected by people who can't be compromised because we don't officially exist. We're going to let Russian intelligence think they've succeeded in eliminating you while actually using that success to map their entire American network." The 28th revelation came when Colonel Martinez revealed that Margaret's biological father, Viktor Petrov, had been attempting to make contact with her through back channels. Not to recruit her for Russian intelligence, but to warn her about a faction within Russian intelligence that wanted her dead regardless of her potential value as an asset. "Viktor Petrov has been walking a tightrope for decades," Martinez explained. "He's a Russian intelligence officer, but he's also a father who discovered he had a daughter living in America. When David Sullivan's activities began drawing attention to you, Viktor started trying to protect you without betraying his own country or compromising his position within Russian intelligence." Margaret learned that some of the assassination attempts against her had actually been prevented by Viktor's interference, not by FBI protection protocols. Her biological father had been working behind the scenes to delay or sabotage operations against her while maintaining his cover as a loyal Russian operative. "Viktor has been feeding us intelligence about Russian operations for the past 6 months," Martinez continued. "He's willing to defect and provide comprehensive information about Russian intelligence networks in exchange for protection for you and for his opportunity to establish a relationship with the daughter he never knew he had." The complexity of the situation was staggering. Margaret's biological father was offering to betray his country to protect her, while factions within Russian intelligence were determined to eliminate her as a security threat. Meanwhile, compromised American agents were trying to deliver her to foreign assassins, while other American agents were trying to protect her. Victor's defection could provide us with intelligence that would allow us to roll up Russian networks throughout North America, Martinez explained. But it would also make you an even higher priority target for Russian intelligence, because they would assume you had access to all the information Victor could provide. The 29th twist came when Margaret discovered that her mother, Catherine Patterson, was still alive. The woman Margaret had mourned as dead for 15 years had actually been living under witness protection after discovering Viktor Petrov's true identity and the danger it posed to her family. "Your mother figured out that Viktor was a Russian intelligence officer shortly after you were born," Colonel Martinez revealed. "She contacted the FBI and agreed to cooperate with a counterintelligence operation designed to monitor Viktor's activities and feed him false information. When the operation was compromised in the late 1990s, we had to fake her death to protect her from retaliation." Margaret's world shattered once again as she realized that her entire adult life had been built on the lie of her mother's death. Catherine had been living under assumed identity, watching her daughter from a distance while being unable to make contact due to security concerns about foreign intelligence surveillance. "She's been monitoring your life through our organization," Martinez continued. "She knew about your marriage to David, about the abuse you suffered, about the investigation and trial. She's been desperate to contact you and help you, but doing so would have exposed both of you to even greater danger from Russian intelligence." The reunion between Margaret and her mother took place in the secure facility deep underground, with both women crying as they embraced for the first time in over a decade. Catherine looked older and thinner than Margaret remembered, marked by years of stress and the pain of being separated from her daughter. "I wanted to contact you so many times," Catherine sobbed as she held Margaret. "When I learned about what David was doing to you, I begged them to let me intervene, but they said it would compromise everything we'd worked for. I had to watch my daughter being destroyed by a monster and pretend not to care." Catherine revealed that she had been working with American intelligence services for years, using her knowledge of Viktor Petrov and Russian intelligence methods to help protect other American families from similar infiltration attempts. Her sacrifice of personal happiness had contributed to counterintelligence successes that had protected national security. The 30th and most shocking revelation came when Colonel Martinez explained that the entire witness protection program Margaret had been placed in was actually a sophisticated intelligence operation designed to flush out compromised American agents and map foreign intelligence networks. "From the moment you agreed to enter witness protection, you became part of a counterintelligence operation," Martinez said. "We've been using Russian intelligence's attempts to eliminate you to trace their networks, identify their assets, and gather evidence of their penetration of American institutions." Margaret realized that her suffering and terror over the past months had been deliberately orchestrated by American intelligence services as part of a larger operation against foreign infiltration. Every safe-house compromise, every assassination attempt, every moment of fear had been carefully monitored and analyzed to gather intelligence about enemy operations. "The mole in the FBI who's been feeding information to Russian intelligence is actually one of our assets," Martinez continued. "He's been providing carefully crafted disinformation while gathering evidence of Russian intelligence operations and identifying other compromised agents throughout the federal government." The scope of the deception was breathtaking. Margaret had been used as unknowing bait in a complex counterintelligence operation that had successfully identified dozens of foreign agents and compromised American officials. Her personal trauma had been instrumentalized for national security purposes without her knowledge or consent. "We understand this is difficult to process," Martinez said, "but your cooperation, willing or unwilling, has helped us identify and neutralize foreign intelligence operations that pose direct threats to American national security. The information we've gathered through monitoring attempts on your life has already prevented several major intelligence disasters." Margaret felt a complex mixture of anger and pride as she processed this final revelation. She had been manipulated and used by her own government almost as thoroughly as she had been by David and foreign intelligence services. But that manipulation had served to protect other innocent people from the same kinds of attacks she had endured. The operation had been successful beyond the intelligence community's wildest expectations. Viktor Petrov's attempts to protect Margaret had provided detailed intelligence about Russian operations, while the fake mole in the FBI had fed disinformation that had caused Russian intelligence to waste resources and expose other assets. David Sullivan's arrest and conviction was always intended to be the beginning, not the end, Martinez explained. "We've used the investigation into his crimes to map foreign intelligence networks, identify compromised American officials, and gather evidence for prosecutions that will roll up Russian operations throughout North America." Margaret learned that dozens of arrests were being planned simultaneously, targeting everyone from low-level criminal associates to high-ranking government officials who had been compromised by foreign intelligence services. The evidence gathered through her case would contribute to the largest counterintelligence operation in American history. But the personal cost remained enormous. Preserve the original life or identity, and she would always live with the knowledge that her suffering had been deliberately prolonged for intelligence-gathering purposes. Her government had protected her, but only after using her as bait in ways that had caused additional trauma and terror. As Margaret sat in the underground facility with her mother and learned the full scope of the operations that had shaped her life, she realized that her story of survival had become something much larger than personal triumph over abuse. She had become an unwitting but crucial player in intelligence warfare between nations, with her personal tragedy serving as the foundation for protecting American national security. The man who had told her she would regret losing him could never have imagined that his threat would ultimately contribute to exposing and neutralizing foreign intelligence operations that had been threatening American security for decades. Margaret's refusal to be destroyed by his abuse had not only saved her own life, but had helped save her country from enemies who operated in shadows and betrayed trust as easily as breathing. Margaret Sullivan had survived domestic abuse, criminal conspiracy, foreign intelligence operations, and manipulation by her own government to emerge as one of the most valuable counterintelligence assets in American history. Her journey from victim to survivor, to unwitting spy, to national security hero had proven that sometimes the most effective way to serve one's country is simply to refuse to surrender to those who seek to destroy everything decent and honest in the world.